Fluorescent lights burn above me with a blinding vengeance. The world feels as if it's obscured by a dense fog. I'm sitting in a room that feels like an icebox, surrounded by blank walls. A man sits across from me, his head down as he flips through a folder of papers. I look down at my hands. Deep crimson coats them with a sticky sheen. As I pull my hands up, they are abruptly stopped by a heavy chain attached to the table. "Where am I?" I ask the man. He doesn't look up from the papers in front of him. "You're in the county jail." His voice is curt. He looks up from the papers and stares into my eyes. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." I worked for some no-name grocery store pulp as a journalist. The pay wasn't the greatest, but you make do with what you got. It was late, around 10:30 in the evening. I was finishing up a draft on a story my editor wanted to run the next day. It seems a family got themselves caught up with some crazy cult and wound up on the wrong side of a ritual homicide. I had to slip the coroner $50 to get a copy of the autopsy report. The details were pretty gory. All the victims were dismembered and a name was carved into them: Malfaces. I had to dig deep into the archives downtown to get any sort of answer. Turns out, back in the 20s, some cult types were cutting up folks the same way out in California. Each murder scene was a bedlam of psychotic messages, symbols, blood, and misery. The case went cold and the cops back then never found them. But that case was 60 years ago. No way those guys are still around. I was climbing the stairs to my editor's office when a horrendous smell filled the stairwell. It reeked of weeks-old mackerel lifted out in the sun. I raised my hand to cover my nose, scattering the pages of my draft. Papers went flying around the stairwell like a blizzard. I scrambled around the stairs like an idiot, trying to grab them. A few of the pages were crumpled and covered in footprints, but I managed to wrangle them all back together. Oddly, the smell that caused the fiasco no longer lingered. My editor, a blunt old alcoholic named Bert Hollern, sat at his desk in a haze of cigarette smoke. "What took you so long?" Bert bellowed as he leaned forward. His stomach bulged like a flesh-filled balloon ready to burst. "Deadline's in 2 minutes." I felt him eyeing me up, a lit cigarette clenched between his yellow teeth. He leaned back and took a drag. "You know what? I don't think we need your story for tomorrow's paper. We'll run it in the late print, for half pay, since deadlines don't matter." I felt my face burn red. Bert was being an ass. I whipped the papers onto his desk. A cup went flying to the ground with a dull thud, spilling a sickly, sweet-smelling liquid across the floor. A throbbing ache lingered in my palm after I walked out of his office. "What an asshole," I said. I opened my clenched fist to see a small bleeding cut. The cut wasn't large, no more than your average paper cut. The odd thing about it, though, was the wound was almost black. Probably got some ink in the cut. That would explain the throbbing. I shrugged it off and went back to my desk. Since I no longer had a deadline to make, I figured there wasn't a point in staying at the office. My car was parked in the shithole lot behind the office. A perfect fit for the crap bucket rusted blue Pinto I drove. The quickest way down to the lot was through the back stairs by my desk. They always reeked of week-old garbage and stale beer. I threw on my coat and made my way down. The lights in the stairwell must have burned out. It was darker than usual. The remaining light was yellowish, like when a bulb is almost dead and the filament is burnt out. The dim light hurt my eyes, and the smell was stronger, too. It turned my stomach like a blender. I nearly barfed at the bottom of the stairs. Thankfully, the fresh air outside saved me from spilling my guts. The parking lot isn't big, yet tonight it seemed to stretch on for miles. My stomach gurgled and weighed me down. I figured something I ate didn't agree with me. I'd wager it was the gas station tuna sandwich from Barlow's that got me. After the arduous journey across the parking lot, I took my keys out of my pocket. When I opened the door, the smell of stale coffee and cigarette ash filled my nose. Brown upholstery, pockmarked with burns, illuminated as the overhead light kicked on. I dropped into the seat like a drunken mess. My arm burned as if it had been skewered by a branding iron. The black mark on my palm had grown, sputtering like a vine. I ran a finger across the cut, the fold of flesh flaying outward. A cold burning sensation spread through my palm, like when you stick your hand in a bucket of ice for too long. I shook my hand a few times, but the pain didn't return. Stress. A hell of a drug. It's around 12:30 in the morning when I leave the parking lot. As good as time as any for last call. My favorite dive, Flanagan's, is only a couple minutes' drive from work. The engine sputtered to life with a death rattle. I lit up a cigarette and took a drag, relishing the flavor. The ride over was pretty uneventful. A few red lights and a stumbling drunk were the only breaks in the otherwise unremarkable scenery. The drunk stopped and watched me as I drove past, his gaze following me with a malicious interest. Our eyes met as I came to a stop at the light. Red light washed across his face in a deep crimson red color. His eyes seemed to pierce my very soul. Burning ache surged through my arm. The light changed, and I drove off. Wood paneling, faux leather stools, and stale beer assault the senses as I opened the door. Mike was behind the bar, pouring a couple shots for some guys at the bar. Mike'd been working at Flanagan's for as long as I can remember. Though his black hair is grayer than it was back then. I made my way over to my usual table towards the back. It was private, great for late-night interviews or personal benders. Mike brought over my order, scotch, neat in a whiskey glass. I threw it back like a man dying of thirst. My encounter with Bert bubbled just below the surface. Another drink would help soothe that. I flexed my hand. It seemed that problem was soothed as well. The bar wasn't crowded, just the regulars and the alcoholics. Not even the music was different, just the same old garbage nu metal played on the jukebox. Sat back, sipping my drink. My mind wandered. One image kept coming back over and over. The mangled flesh of poor Tammy Collins. The blood-red letters of her carved flesh spelling out Malfaces. I looked down at my watch. 2:45 glowed back at me. Raised my hand into the air. Hey, Mike. One for the road. Even the booze couldn't drown out the scenes floating around inside my head. I tossed back the last of my drink and waved goodnight to Mike. Money's on the table. I stumbled across the street. Just another typical night for yours truly. The images still plagued me as I dropped into the driver's seat. A deep pit of emotion ate away at my chest. I blew my guts onto the floor of the Pinto. Fucking great. Bile and scotch burned my throat. Dug around the glove box for napkins and knocked a manila folder to the floor. Picked it up and wiped the dripping vomit off of it. It was a coroner's report. At the top of the page next to the victim's name was an address. I knew the street. A small area in the suburbs on the other side of town. Something in my now emptied guts gave me an idea. I shifted the car into drive and headed out of the city. 41 Suncrest Avenue. It's a place I'll never forget. It's around 3:30 in the morning when I arrive. Neon yellow police line tape blocked off the main gate leading into the yard. It's a rather handsome house with tall, healthy hedges framing a well-landscaped yard. Jutting up from the flower bed close to the front door is one of those home security shield stakes. Not that it did the Collinses much good. The house was a quaint ranch painted a cool shade of blue with a bay window facing out towards the street. I slipped under the tape and got closer. The beat cops wouldn't stop me. I have press credentials. Well, as real credentials as my rack of a paper can provide. The front door is taped off as well. I grabbed the knob and gave it a twist. No surprise. The cops left it unlocked. The scene inside was appalling. I'd seen some of the photos, but they didn't do it justice. Crime scene markers labeled every splatter of blood. At least 40 of them littered the living room alone. A pungent smell hung around the room. The headlights of a passing car cascaded through the window. Faded hand-scrawled letters on the wall caught my eye as the headlights passed over them. The crime scene guys had left some things behind. Lights, tarps, a couple cases. A tan envelope poked out from a case in the corner of the room. I had to dance across the floor, avoiding the still wet blood splatters. I tugged at the envelope a few times before it slipped free of the case. A small stack of instant photos were inside. I held one up to the light coming through the window. Stubs of candle circled a body, a faint wisp of smoke lingering in the air. A blood-stained kitchen knife sat at the victim's feet. The next photo showed the words scrawled across the wall in blood. I could only make out the word Malfaces. A clustered group of severed hands nailed underneath like some kind of floral arrangement. Each photo worse than the last. I never imagined that anything would be this brutal. I tucked the photos back into the case and made my way back outside. My stomach felt as if it was filled with gravel. I pounded my fist against the wall. A hot, blinding flash of pain soared through my arm. The mark on my palm had crawled up my arm like a spider. Tendril-like legs sprawled outwards in all directions. My knees buckled from the pain and I dropped like a stone. A voice called out to me. It felt like a tickle in the back of my mind, almost like TV static. Streetlights blinked in and out like fireflies. My arm was numb, save for the throbbing ache of the mark. The first embers of daylight glowed a dull orange against the waning night. It never crossed my mind until now just how close I lived to the Collins. It's crazy how only a few blocks can seem like an ocean. I parked the Pinto along the curb, bouncing the passenger tire off of it. My shuffling steps crunched up the sidewalk towards the front door. I fumbled with my keys as I opened the door. Pale white light flickered from my bedroom. The garbled notes of the national anthem played out the station as it signed off before cutting the static. I tossed my bag onto the couch and walked into the kitchen. A stack of dirty dishes greeted me from the sink. I pried open the fridge door and grabbed beer. Every part of my body ached with sickly exhaustion. I collapsed onto the couch. The photos played through my mind like a spinning carousel. I cracked the beer and tossed the cap into an ashtray. A small puff of ash lifted into the air. The beer helped dull my mind as sleep grew on me. The last thought of my conscious mind was the words on the wall. My sleep was troubled, to say the least. Visions of candlelit rituals haunted my dreams. It's late in the afternoon when I eventually woke up. Sweat drenched my clothes and the couch. The taste of stale cigarettes clung to the inside of my mouth. I grabbed the half-drank beer from the table and dragged myself to the bathroom. I flicked on the bathroom light. The bulb buzzed and crackled in the socket, emitting a warm yellow light. I stared at myself in the mirror. Dark circles hung like sandbags under my eyes. Every move felt like trudging through wet concrete. I chugged the remainder of the beer and crawled into the shower. The warm water engulfed me like a comfortable blanket. My thoughts still cycled the photos in the gaps between conscious and subconscious. I grabbed the shampoo bottle off the shelf. A sharp jolt of pain in my arm sent the bottle flying. I clattered to the tub floor, spraying water and soap across the bathroom. I wiped the spray from my face, sending a stinging pain through my eyes. I rubbed them vigorously, trying to stop the burning. When I opened my eyes, the room was red. I was back at the murder scene, 41 Suncrest Avenue. The Collinses lay spread out in front of me in a circle, their cries muffled by the rags stuffed into their mouths. 3 figures stood at the outskirts of the circle, draped in deep, crimson robes. They moved in unison, knives raised above their heads. I raised my hand with theirs, my body moving autonomously. Warm blood covered my hands, covered them like paint. A boundless joy washed over me. I moved with silent grace over to the wall. I painted his words with a divine fervor in my heart. Every stroke of my fingers was pure ecstasy. The jubilant moment is broken by a shrill ring of a telephone. I looked around. I was back in my bathroom. A room spun and a torrent of yellow bile erupted from my mouth. I held back more vomit as I rushed to answer the phone. Finally awake? Been trying to get a hold of you all morning. I spouted a glob into the sink. Yeah, it's been a rough day. The voice on the other end laughed. The voice belonged to the contact that got me the info about the Collins' murders. I never learned his name. Sometimes it's safer that way. Listen, I know you're working on that ritual murder story. Meet me at the old St. Thomas Rectory. I think I may have found something. I wrapped up the call and got dressed. It seemed like the day was going to be an interesting one. The old rectory sat next to the boarded-up remnants of St. Thomas Parish. The tall brick bell tower jutted into the air like a swollen thumb. Boarded windows and graffitied walls cover the once holy veneer, another casualty of the endless rot of the city. I still remember Father Santos mumbling his sermons from the pulpit. I lit up a cigarette while I waited for my contact to show up. This would be the first and only time we'd meet in person. It's almost 5 o'clock by the time he showed up. A road-worn station wagon, pockmarked by rust and mismatched panels, pulled up beside me, the windows tinted in almost inky black. I could see my own reflection in them. I put out my cigarette and stepped out of the car. We walked around the rectory in silence till we reached a broken gate at the back of the building. The years hadn't been kind to the old place. Needles, bottles, trash, and debris were scattered around like confetti. What a damn shame, I said. You used to come here? The contact looked back at me. Yeah, my parents and I used to worship here every Sunday. We walked across the playground, heading towards the church itself. Vines gripped the side of the building, covering it in a thick, green blanket of leaves. Not much further. Just gotta get to the altar, he said. He passed through the vines with a grunting squeak echoing after him. Shadows crawled along the walls, scurrying away from the rays of late afternoon light that came in through the broken stained glass windows. Old church notices and flyers curled down from their pushpins on the wall. The carpet squashed underfoot as if I was walking in a swamp. A large set of doors separated us from the main chapel where the altar was. Are you ready? It's not a pleasant scene. I swallowed my doubts and nodded. He cracked the door and went inside. Even before I went in, the smell hit me. It smelled like a slaughterhouse. The chapel was dark. The light of dwindling candles flickered beside the altar. Rows of pews were pushed to the sides of the room, opening up space in front of the altar for a large wooden table. Something dripped from the table, pulling on the tattered carpeting. A blinding light swept across my view like a lighthouse cutting through the fog. Come on, it gets worse. The light from the flashlight split the darkness into a narrow valley. Through the fleeting light, I can make out letters and symbols spelling words I don't recognize. We reached the table after what felt like hours. The surface of the table was scarred with heavy cuts and divots. Blood pooled into the marks like tiny ponds. Pieces of meat were scattered about like the remnants of a meal. What the hell is this? I asked my contact. He didn't answer at first. The light from the flashlight bobbed up a small set of stairs towards the altar. This is the beginning! The room flooded with light as if a flashbang had gone off. As my vision came back, the murky image of a cross filled my view. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get them to focus. I wish I hadn't. The cross was formed from the severed arms and legs of several people. The headless body of a man played the role of Jesus. His chest flayed open. A circle of heads stared upwards towards the scene as some kind of grisly audience, their eyes plucked from their severed skulls. My contact cackled with glee at the sight. Glorious, isn't it? I stood still, locked in place. I, too, was once overwhelmed by the beauty that is Malphasis. Come, you have been chosen for a great purpose. My arm burned as I ran out of the chapel. You can't escape fate! His voice followed me like a shadow. His shots carried out to the courtyard as I sprinted towards my car. I was never as happy to see that car as I was then. I dived into the driver's seat and turned the key to the ignition. The engine sputtered to life and I floored it down the street. Gravel and smoke filled the air behind me. I drove till I hit a gas station 5 miles away and called the cops. After hanging up the payphone, I slumped down onto the ground. My chest burned with adrenaline and my arm throbbed with every heartbeat. I looked down at my palm. The black mark had grown to encompass my whole palm. I flexed my fingers. They felt cold, almost dead. A deep sigh escaped my lips, and I pushed myself up from the ground. The afternoon sun had turned cold and blue as it hid behind the horizon. What have I gotten myself into? I found myself back at Flanagan's, downing several glasses of scotch. The cops had searched the place. They didn't find anyone there. The officer I dealt with did tell me they found more bodies in the kitchen. Seems they had taken homeless folks off the street. I rolled the liquor around in my glass. It moved like a vortex in slow motion, flickering in the light as it moved. My eyes followed the swirls round and round. A finger tapped me on the shoulder, sending me flying out of the chair. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Mike extended his hand to help me up. I grabbed his hand and pulled myself up from the floor. Don't worry about it. I've got a lot on my mind. Mike tossed me a towel from behind the bar. Hollern's on the phone. He doesn't sound too happy. I wiped my face and tossed the towel back on the bar. I finished the last remaining sip in my glass. That man is never happy. The phone was back in the office. My steps wobbled and weaved down the darkened hallway. Pale neon coated the walls in a wash of reds and blues. I passed a group of women waiting to get into the restroom. Couldn't make out what they were saying as they talked in hushed voices. My nerves were shot. I could feel the paranoia take a hold of my senses, strangling them like a python. The door to the office hung open just a crack. It was dark except for the blinking of the red light of the phone. I felt around for the light switch, knocking several pictures off the wall. With a satisfying click, the lights came on. Dark concrete block walls covered an array of various beer promotions, old calendars, and photos filled my view. The room stank to high hell like cigarettes, those cheap ones with a fancy name. I walked over to the desk and picked up the receiver. I could hear Bert huffing before I put it to my ear. God damn it, I've been trying to get a hold of you all day, Bert yelled into my ear. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. I didn't have the energy to deal with him. Well, you got me. What do you want? Bert grumbled something I couldn't make out before speaking again. Your story, the one about the cult murder, was a big hit. The head honcho wants a follow-up piece by the end of the night. Think you can handle it? I could feel my hand turning white from gripping the receiver. I took a deep breath before answering. I'll do it, but it's not going to be cheap. I hung up the phone and headed to the restroom. Those drinks had finally caught up to me. I passed through the door and grimaced. The stench of urine wafted up from the ice trough against the wall. Even at the best of times, it's a dump. After finishing up my business, I headed over to the sink, some cold water to sober up. I turned on the faucet and a deluge of brown water poured out. Too drunk to care, I scooped up a large handful and splashed it onto my face. An older man came out of one of the stalls and stood beside me. He wore a crimson coat over a black dress shirt. He looked over at me and smiled a half-smile. I recognized the old fellow, a regular at the bar. The now familiar cold pain shot up my arm. It hit me so hard my eyes rolled back and I fell to the piss-stained floor. My mind spun in my skull like the scotch my glass had. The old man walked out of the restroom as quiet as a mouse. As my mind blacked out, I could make out the words on the back of his jacket. Suffering is just the start of great things. When I come to, I'm at my desk with a small stack of papers next to me. Each page is written in my handwriting. I flipped through each page, trying to understand what I had apparently written. Page after page contained gibberish and symbols I didn't recognize. When I got to the last page, my heart stopped. Malfacis, 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 Malfacis. The name repeated across the page, top to bottom. It looked like the ravings of a lunatic. Maybe I was going crazy, I thought to myself. I pushed away from my desk in a frenzy, toppling over in my chair. The pages scattered into the darkness of the office. The light from my desk lamp shone like a flare in the night, an island in the darkness. A muffled scream cut through the silence. It came from upstairs. My mind flew into a flurry of emotion. I picked myself up off the floor and headed towards the stairs. A cold draft blew through the stairwell like a winter storm. My breath hung in the air, in small clouds. It was dark in the stairwell. Not even the emergency lights were on. It was as if someone had cut the power. I gripped onto the handrail for dear life as I climbed upwards. The ice-cold steel bit into my hand like a savage animal, taking pieces of me as I went. The blood froze near instantly on my skin. When I got to the landing, the door to Bert's office was wide open. Bert never kept his office door open, even in the dead of summer. I strained my ears to see if I could hear anything. The only thing I could hear was a low hum, the kind of hum power lines make in the summer. The room was a mess. Papers, bottles tossed around the room haphazardly. Bert's office was dark too, but I could make out a large, vague shape in the center of the room. My arm burned with an almost static charge, like it had fallen asleep. Every step towards the shape was torture. The pain grew until it was unbearable. It was only a few feet from the door, but I was completely exhausted when I reached the center of the room. It was large, the shape, covered in a heavy, moving blanket. I reached out my hand to pull the blanket off when it violently reacted. It shivered like a frightened animal. I pulled it back, revealing Bert's bleeding face. A gag placed in his mouth, and tears streamed down his bruised face. "You finally made it," a deep voice called out to me. "Who's there?" "His arrival is at hand. Let this man's blood be the ink that scribes his name." I looked around, trying to find where the voice was coming from. "Whose arrival?" I asked, my voice shaking. The voice boomed with deep anger. "You know his name." "Malfacis," I whispered. My arm burned worse than it had earlier, like I had dipped it into lava. I dropped to my knees, grabbing onto my arm with my other hand. "What do you want from me?" I screamed out. A man draped in deep crimson robes stepped towards me. He reached down and picked me up by my armpits. "Your divine purpose." That's the last thing I remember. I told the detective across from me. The handcuffs around my wrists are cold and heavy, chaining me to the table we are both seated at. That's a lot to take in. I find it hard to believe you're not involved in all of this. You're connected to 3 murder scenes now. I don't look at him. My fingers move in little circles around the table, drawing symbols and letters on the steel top with blood from my still wet hands. The detective pounded the table hard. My eyes darted up to meet his. "Who or what is Malfacis? That name is plastered all over the victims and crime scenes. Who pulled you off your newest victim, carving it into him with a fountain pen?" I look back down at the table. My arm burns coldly. Malfacis is the beginning.